encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. Conversations about life, Christianity, and culture. Welcome into Four Preachers and a Podcast. We are the Four Preachers, reunited once again. We thought it wasn't going to happen, but we want to welcome y'all to our 60-minute episode. I'm Robert Hatfield from Henderson, Tennessee, and there he is, the man himself. He's back after a month in court. Hiram Kemp.
Free at last. Bowling
Green, Kentucky. How you doing, Hiram? Everything good? You okay?
Doing good, man. Having a blast.
All right. I'm glad to hear that. We're going to circle back to you in a moment. Brad McNutt's here from Moulton, Alabama. Hey, Brad.
What's up?
And Chance Hicks from North Charleston, South Carolina. What's up, Chance?
Hello, guys. How are y'all?
Hello. So Hiram has been missing for forever. And he's world traveler, and he's also keeper of justice. Mm-hmm. Tell us more, Hiram, about your accomplishments. The listeners want to know.
He was going to be a lawyer at one point.
Was he?
I was at one point.
Look at that.
That was on the docket. Yeah.
After spending a month in our justice system, has that reignited any old flames? Or
it has not. It has not. Squelched every flame.
It squashed every flame.
It has.
Tell us about your trip. You were over there like walking in Bible places. How was that?
Yeah, we were supposed to go to Israel. We didn't because of all of the turmoil over there, but we went to Rome.
Is there something going on over there? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but we went to Rome, Ephesus. We went to Athens and saw some stuff. So we went with Bible Land Passages, John and Carla Moore and folks. And yeah, it was a good time.
Good. Well, I'm glad you had a good trip. And then, Hiram was serving on jury duty, doing his civic duty there. And that's why we haven't seen nor heard from him in quite a while.
Romans 13, just obeying.
Romans 13. Paying taxes and showing up to summons. That's
paying taxes and inviting
working for
people.
campus and the boys.
And this is what, it wasn't 30 seconds that Hiram joined our Zoom call today that we didn't say. This is what we've been missing.
This is it.
Right here. So that's good. This is season 2, episode 11. It is consequently our season finale. We take, here we are nearing the end of the year. And so we're taking a break, during the holidays and the new year and all that. We'll be back, the Lord willing, the first full week of January, although things will be a little different. And we've got a little announcement we need to make at the end of today's episode. So you must listen to all of this tomfoolery and shenanigans before we can reveal all of that. Season 2, the conclusion of season 2 actually wraps up the first full year of Four Preachers and a Podcast. And what fun we've had together.
Hey, Mag, we're now going to play a highlight reel.
Yeah. now our greatest hits.
Cue it, Robert.
And we're back.
We're going to let you behind the scenes. Oh, wait, no, we'll be canceled.
No, yeah. And I mean, pretty much this whole show is behind the scenes. So, anyway. We do have a secret back room, but only we have the key. Anyway, many of you have emailed male@thelightnetwork.tv, and you have not received a response because that's not a real email address.
Nope.
Others of you have emailed mail@thelightnetwork.tv, and today we're going to go to the mailbag, and we have some listener feedback that we're going to be working through. We've got 4 questions here. It is possible that we have more questions that we will not be able to get to today, and if not, hey, stick with us. Season 3, we already have some of that planned in the hopper. But anyway, we've got some questions here. We're gonna go around the room and talk about some of those and things like that. And this first one actually does have something to do. We mentioned Israel and things like that. Here's our first question. We're not going to mention anybody's names or anything, but these are all real questions from real listeners, and we'll have a collective prayer for them at the end because they not only listen but they also talk to us.
The truth is, we sat around and we're making this up as we go. These are not real questions.
We wouldn't do this even to ourselves. What are you talking about? Well, we do appreciate the listener's question. All right, question number one. She's I don't know, he or she. I have a question for you. I'm wondering if you have any ideas. My husband's uncle.
I'm gonna say that.
Wait a minute.
I'm gonna say that's a she.
Okay, yeah, that's a she. All right, my husband's uncle, and that would make this person her uncle-in-law, right? Is that how that works?
But most importantly, it would make her a she.
I think we got an episode on gender identity, Robert, somewhere on the network.
I didn't read the question beforehand. I forgot. Anyway, okay, this person, her uncle, it's a she.
Yeah, trust our answers.
She's a wife, and she has a husband, and so she's a she. And her uncle-in-law said that he says a prayer for the peace of or in Jerusalem every morning. I asked him, where's that found? And he said the New Testament. And then he said the Old. I've never heard of this before. I'm wondering how to respond. Have you ever heard of this? I've heard about people praying for Jerusalem, right? I hear about it a lot, like in election cycles, which we're coming up on one in 2024, right? But
it's already that time again.
Yeah, it is. It happens fast. But, people talk about standing with Israel and, from a political perspective. But a lot of times it's said like it's like a religious thing that they stand with Israel and things like that, prayers for Jerusalem. I've heard of that before. Have y'all?
Yeah, I mean, Psalm 122:6 says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Okay, there you go.
Mean, it is there. I think probably what a lot of people have in mind when we're talking about praying for the peace of Jerusalem is, I would assume it's a connection to the fact that Israel is still viewed as God's chosen people, that it's God's nation, and probably tied to some premillennial underpinnings is what I'm gathering from the question. So that's all I got. I'm going to let y'all answer the real stuff.
So that takes us to going back to the Abrahamic promise, right? And the covenant that God made with Abraham, Genesis 12, reiterated a few times. And among those promises includes a land promise, which sort of becomes in shorthand referred to among Bible students and throughout the Old and New Testaments alike as the promised land. It was promised to Abraham and to his descendants, right? Somebody take it from there. I mean, is that an enduring covenant? Was that fulfilled or not? Where do you want to go with that from that point?
Well,
obviously, there was a Canaanite conquest.
Yes. So Joshua 21, 43 through 45 is where you got the conquest. Joshua starts in Jericho in chapter 6. They work all the way through. Joshua starts allotting the different tribes their portions, 13 through 20. But in 21, 43 through 45, it's explicit that God gave Israel all the land he promised. None of his promises failed. Everything, by the way, that's the whole point of detailing all of that stuff. This tribe got this land, this tribe. So when you get to 21, 43 through 45, there's this summary statement. God did everything he promised to do concerning Israel. But the land promise was always conditional. See Deuteronomy 28 and other passages for the land would vomit Israel out if she misbehaved. And that happened to Israel with the Babylonian captivity. And they lose the land. The Messiah is promised to come and all of that. But there's nothing said about Israel re-entering the land or in the New Testament about Israel being holy acreage in the sense that it has some prized position in God's scheme. I would just add to what Brad said and think about the Babylonian captivity. In Jeremiah 29 and verse 7, God tells the people that are in Babylonian captivity to seek the welfare of the city where they're going and to pray for Babylon, because they're living there. And we should pray 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 4 for every nation, for all rulers, for all people in authority. But any prayers on behalf of Jerusalem that are linked to some kind of special thing God's doing with the land or with the Jewish people is just an inaccurate statement biblically. God's chosen people today are Christians, but God loves everybody and wants his people praying for people in every nation and every place. You can pray for your homeland. That's fine. But you can pray for other places too. And just remember that, when you say you're praying for Jerusalem, that's fine. As long as we realize that when we're doing that, it's not because God's gonna like come back there and do something unique. But whenever there's tragedy and travesty happening in the world, Christians should be praying. If they could pray in and for Babylon, we can pray for any nation, any place, and we should.
Yeah, and God's purpose for the nation of Israel and that promised land in the Old Testament is connected to the coming of the Messiah, right? Because Jesus is going to be born in Bethlehem of Judah, according to the prophet. And once that is accomplished, he's accomplished what he planned to do with that land, which was to bring us to Jesus. And now Jesus was bringing the kingdom with him. Read Luke's account. So everything is tied up in Jesus, all that fulfillment.
Brad, you mentioned the term earlier, premillennialism, a premillennial perspective. Maybe we ought to sort of give people a primer on that, just since we've sort of raised that a little bit. There is a counterpoint to what we've just described over the last 5 to 8 minutes, and that would, I guess, be summarized in a premillennialist view. What we're about to say is going to be difficult because premillennialism varies and it has different flavors to it. So we want to be forthright about a lot of that. We don't want to, pigeonhole people or put people in certain boxes. But would it be fair, Brad, in your estimation, to say that the general view of premillennialism would basically follow what you have begun to describe and are about to describe to us, right?
Sure. I think more specifically, the school of thought is more along the lines of what they call dispensational premillennialism.
Mm-hmm.
And the notion that Christ, this is where you have the rapture, the church or the individuals being taken out of the world for, I can't remember, I think it's 3.5 years. It may be 7, but something is telling me 3.5. And then they come back with Jesus, and there is Antichrist, Battle of Armageddon, Great Tribulation, and then Christ comes back for 1,000-year reign, and a number of things along those lines. And so that's a pretty common theory.
And the idea is that the reign is taking place on that Abrahamic covenant land, specifically
yes.
Jerusalem. Is that right?
In Jerusalem, all of that, maybe in certain portions, temple restored, temple worship restored, things along those lines. One of the basic underpinnings of premillennial interpretation is that we interpret all texts, prophetic or apocalyptic texts, the same.
Mm-hmm.
And
they would say literally.
Yes, literally. Even though I think, in my judgment, I think that claim is not consistent. The claim itself is not consistent, neither with what they're espousing nor what the Bible is actually saying. But anyway, that's a pretty predominant, and it became a predominant theory because of the popularity of the Scofield Bible. And Scofield included a lot of premillennial ideas in the notes in his Bible that became known as the Scofield Study Bible. That was very popular, and I've still seen people with it today. I don't know the exact nature of its popularity, but and it's certainly a lot of your television personalities, ministers, preachers, things along those lines, they're preaching things like this. Like John Hagee is a big proponent of these types of things. And so that's the general idea. We should always stand with Israel because they're God's people. And I've even heard John MacArthur is a very adamant premillennialist.
He even went so far as to say that Calvinism necessitates premillennialism. And so, boy, and I'm not saying all Calvinists agree with John MacArthur. They certainly do not. But MacArthur has certainly been a champion of Calvinism. And for him to say, well, this viewpoint, Calvinism, naturally, logically necessitates premillennialism, that's a pretty bold statement. I mean, there's a lot there.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the general notion that you have, and that's why people look for signs and say this is the war and the rumor of war that's going to happen. Matthew 24, which I would see as a two different discussions taking place. A lot of premillennialists see them as the same. And so anyway, that's I would say that's in your mainstream, especially evangelical church. You're going to hear something along those lines, although a number of people who are Presbyterian, they are more in, I think, higher covenant theology. Premillennialism is not a real strong, it doesn't have a stronghold in a lot of Presbyterian churches, but it will in say Baptist churches and things along those lines.
And I would also add about premillennialism, the fighting ground for this is based off of one major text in Revelation 20, where the 1,000-year reign is discussed. However, in that passage, David's throne is not mentioned, Israel, the land, or a lot of the things, the other trappings. But if you take Revelation 20 and set it aside, which is admittedly a difficult text to handle, you're building a whole doctrine on a sandcastle pretty much, because that whole doctrine is based off of a few statements about individuals that I'm going to argue are the martyrs of Revelation, reigning with Christ for 1,000 years. And then from that, building a doctrine from which we ought to look at the entire Bible and every passage that talks about the reign of Jesus and his kingdom. And then we go to Matthew 24 and all these passages. But that word millennium, that whole idea of 1,000-year reign, pre or post, is seated and based on what you do with Revelation 20. And so anyway,
there's also
basic hermeneutical rule.
Yeah. There's also the view, isn't there, among premillennialists, and I think this speaks to the question, and especially about Jerusalem, but also the nation of Israel, that Israel, Abraham's physical descendants, and the church are two distinct groups, which is we would argue, while admitting, the difference between the covenants, obviously the Old and New Testament. Nevertheless, Galatians 6:16 refers to, I believe, the church as the Israel of God. Things like that. Anybody want to throw something in on that? I mean, in other words, the idea being, I guess, that during the 1,000-year reign, the Jews would repent and come to Christ. Is that the notion there?
From what I understand, it's something along the lines of Romans 11:26. It says, "And so will all Israel be saved."
Okay.
And so it's something that's going to happen at the end times. That Israel will come and realize. I'm pretty sure realize and acknowledge the Messiah and accept him.
But that also lends a lot of credence, doesn't it, to a lot of evangelical Christians to have some sympathy toward the Jews, even modern Jews.
You want to be found on their side. Otherwise, you'd be found, in the words of Gamaliel, to be fighting against God.
Yeah, right. Okay, right.
And I think there's also sometimes, Robert, and this may not be as premillennial focused, but there's been a pendulum swing from a lot of anti-Semitic language in the past to now we've got to make sure we don't say anything. If you say anything against God dealing, especially with the Jews, people are worried about that being anti-Semitic. But Paul says in Romans 2:29, those that are of Israel are the true circumcised, are those that are in Christ. So that's what really matters. And
Yeah. And so, we can pray for Jerusalem, pray for Israel and for their salvation. And there'll be the option and the offer of salvation for them is just like for everyone else is found in Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's Romans 9:6. They are not all Israel who are of Israel, where Paul makes that delineation, makes a play on words.
Okay. Very good. Anything else we need to say about that first question? I think that pretty well. What I wanted us to go into the premillennial thing because I think that does add some context to the question itself. And frankly, I think that there's more of these sort of premillennial notions. I think that some people may espouse it without realizing that's what they're doing. And we need to just kind of have our eyes open about that a little bit.
I might just add this. It's interesting that right now, and for the last, I'd say probably 100 years or so, premillennialism is kind of the idea that dominates. But when our nation was being founded, it was postmillennialism. It was something quite opposite of this. That was, Alexander Campbell, who's famously associated with Churches of Christ, was a postmillennialist. I think Jonathan Edwards was a postmillennialist, several others. And this is the idea that you had to create the 1,000-year, you had to have the period of peace before Christ would return. And that's what makes it post-millennialism. And then you've got premillennialism. So you may look into some of that if you're interested.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate that question. Our next question is a follow-up question that actually came after season 1, episode 15. We did a Can You Help episode on what constitutes worship, which was actually a listener question back then. Perhaps another listener has said this. I have a follow-up question that came to mind after listening to your podcast, What Constitutes Worship? And this is actually a 4-part question. All right, so you kind of cheated the system.
I'm
here.
out.
Okay, but, whatever. We'll forgive you. Question 1, is the contribution an act of worship, or is it just a command that we need to follow? And then number 2, is a corporate contribution in worship service the only time we can give, or can we have a special contribution on another day? Question 3, was 1 Corinthians 16:2 talking about a special contribution or something that they normally did every Sunday? And then they said, I'm not trying to get out of giving. It's clear the Bible teaches we should be generous. I really just want to make sure that we're worshiping correctly and not taking things out of context to prove what we're doing. And then also, what is biblical generosity? I've heard it different ways, one of which was that to be generous, it had to be sacrificial and not out of our abundance. As an example, Luke 21. And then they say, this is a lot, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It is
All
a
right,
lot.
So is the
And I would
contribution an act of worship?
Well, the only thing I'm going to say on any of these questions is this. You're reading the Bible very, very well.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I think whoever's asking this question, they are asking the right questions. They're paying attention to the text very carefully.
They're good questions. Yep. Yeah. All right. So obviously we usually in our fellowship, I suppose most worship services, I don't know, this is completely colloquial off the top of my head here, but like most churches I know pass baskets. Okay. So, even those with whom we may vary theologically, usually baskets are passed or plates or something. So,
Or there's a box.
Or there's
I would
a box.
say, and Robert, I would go out a little wider than that. I don't know of a religious group that doesn't, especially under the umbrella of Christendom. So I've been to a lot of churches. I've never been to one. They might do it more than once. They might bind a percentage, but I don't know of the religious group that doesn't take up. Now, that's one thing everybody agrees on, by the way, on the first day of the week, too. Like, it's not just like, well, we might do the Lord's Supper quarterly or annually or weekly.
Yeah.
Everybody reads 1 Corinthians 16:2. Now, why we do that, we can talk about it. But like, everybody does that every Sunday, sometimes several times.
Okay.
Like, that's not up for,
the least debated passage in all of Scripture.
yeah, like we're going to get, now we might talk about amounts and percentages, but that it must be done or that it is done, is not up for question in a lot of people's mind. But anyway, I just figured I would drop that as you were being colloquial. I was backing you up, bro.
Thank
You're right.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that was just off the old dome there, and sometimes that goes well, and sometimes it doesn't.
Hiram is the world traveler, so he would have a good perspective.
That's correct. Yeah,
I have done that.
So, I think it's just important to remember that when it comes to worship and acts of worship, there's more going on than meets the eye. We talked about this a little bit in the episode about what constitutes worship, that there has to be intentionality to the action that's given, and that we may do similar actions, if not the same actions, outside of a worship context, but without the intention of worship, which does make a difference. I'm reminded that in the Old Testament, physical sacrifices were brought and they were called gifts. Numbers 18:11, Hebrews 5 verse 1. The wise men, when they came to worship Jesus, manifested gifts. Matthew 2 verse 11. And the New Testament parlance is often the term translated fellowship, for example, which I think may embrace the act of giving. If you compare Acts 2:42 with like Romans 15:26 or 2 Corinthians 9 verse 13. So it's certainly not out of the question to conclude that giving, the act of giving, that is a contribution, can be an act of worship. Where are you guys with this?
Yeah, Robert, I think you're right. And you talked about this on the worship episode, which I thought was helpful. And that is, like, we can get into all the word study stuff, but the Bible doesn't have to come out and say X is worship for it to be. For example, concerning giving, in Philippians 4, Paul's talking about the gift he received at the hand of Epaphroditus from the Philippians. And without a doubt, anybody familiar with the Old Testament realizes he is evoking Old Testament worship language. He says, I received from Epaphroditus those things which were given to me, and it went up as a sweet smelling savor to God. Paul's receiving the money, but he says it was a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and well pleasing to God. Now, they gave the money to Paul, but Paul brings up all of this Old Testament sacrificial language and then actually says God was pleased with their contribution. That's worship language to me. That's a financial contribution the Philippians took up to support Paul, carried to him by Epaphroditus. He even says, I've received full payment and more. I am well supplied. This was for a preacher, no doubt about it. Special occasion, no doubt about it. But yet he says, I want you to view your giving through the prism of it being worshipful, and God smelt the sacrifice. I was filled by it, but God smelled it and signed off on it. And so we probably should view our giving from that more than a building fund or supporting the preacher. Like, it's a sacrifice well pleasing to God, is how Paul describes it.
Yeah. How would y'all characterize then this act of giving as an act of worship? I mean, like, I can see, I guess it's like a visual thing, but like I can see the sacrifice of praise in song, you know, I can, as worship. We're talking about like praising, glorifying God. You know, I can see prayers in as much as they certainly include thanksgiving to God, praise of God, but also beseeching God, supplicating God. How, even like the Lord's Supper, you know, obviously we're thinking about Jesus, we're praising God for the gift of his son, we're looking forward to, you know, when he returns and all that. How does, I think maybe in some people's mind there can be a disconnect when it comes to like, well, I wrote a check and I put it in this plate when it was passed. You know, like, how is that worshipful? I guess to me, there's a disconnect sometimes between, and Hiram's just gone. He said, I'm out of here. Oh, okay, there he is. Now back.
I don't know what happened.
I think sometimes there can be a disconnect between like our perception of giving, like we joke, I gave it to the office, whatever, versus that language, like a sweet smelling savor, well pleasing to God. Like, how do y'all connect those dots?
I think it's a recognition of, you know, you're looking at, here's what I've been given, and it's a recognition of God is the giver of that. And so you are giving thanks by offering to him the first fruits, right? By giving as we've been prospered. So it's thinking about the source of your income isn't really from where you're working. Even behind that, and even greater, is the God who created us, the God who made us, the God who provides those opportunities.
So maybe the act of giving in our worship services ought to be a little more reflective than sometimes we allow it to be as well.
Yeah, when Paul talks about, go ahead, Chance.
The language of 2 Corinthians 9, down in verse 12, I think it is. So you have Paul writing it back to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 about this collection for the saints. But in verse 12, he refers to it as, the New King James says, the administration of this service. And the term service there, at least in some other context of the New Testament, refers to like priestly service. So you have Luke 1, when Zechariah goes into the temple. It's Luke chapter 1 and verse 23. That same term is found, and it refers to him going in to do priestly service. And it's that same kind of terminology Paul is using there with the Corinthians concerning their giving and their offering. And so we, I think, should see it that way. The Hebrews writer connects it with the priesthood of Jesus in Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 6. And so giving is this priestly service that we're fulfilling. So it's a spiritual sacrifice, to use Peter's terminology, 1 Peter 2, 5 and 9. That comes up before God, pleasing and acceptable.
Hiram, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, we should keep in mind, though, that all the giving in the New Testament has somewhat of a different motivation from the Old, though there are similarities. And that is, when Paul gets ready to talk about giving in both 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, he doesn't talk about percentages as much as he focuses on heart posture and motivation. So at the end of 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 24, after telling them, hey, you know, the Macedonians already gave, they're poorer than you, don't be outdone, he says, so give before the church is the proof of your love and our boasting on your behalf. Like, don't make us look bad, but show your love, prove it by your giving and your contribution, and demonstrate that. And at the end of 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 15, he's going to say, thanks be unto God for his indescribable gift. So our giving is to reflect what we've received from God. That's why we do it cheerfully, as those that have been abundantly blessed. Giving is an outflow of our gratitude toward God, and we show that by being willing to part ways with our material things, just as Jesus was willing to part temporarily from heaven to come here on our behalf. So we shouldn't view our giving as so much a science as much as it is an art and an act of devotion as well, more so than checking a box. Okay, we gave today. It's the proof of our love. I know people talk about giving and they're like, God never accepted less than 10%. You've got to do this. And I just think that's the wrong approach. I think that's the wrong angle to come at it from, as much as we should be thinking how blessed we've been, what God's given to us, and just read the New Testament passages on giving and let the motivation from those passages be our motivation. And I don't think we'll give less when we do that, but I think it'll change the way we go about giving.
I think there is a way that we need to explore sometimes of giving as a protest to the world around us. So in essence, what we're saying is this: when we're singing and making petitions of God, we are protesting the idea that we serve anyone but him. Like, we're not submitting to anybody else. And so when we're willing to, what is one of the chief gods that people worship? Well, it's money. And when I'm willing to hand that over willingly and sacrificially and with joy to God, I am protesting the fact, I am showing God, this will not reign over me. You will. You're the giver. This is the gift. And I'm going to keep it in that perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think there are a ton of different ways you can think about giving as an act of worship, if you want to call them that. I kind of like the term avenues, because they're really ways of connecting with the heart of God, more than just, and I understand why we call them acts, and I'm not saying don't do that. Yeah. But I think avenues is maybe a more helpful term, that we understand and tap into and connect with God in those moments.
Yeah, the phrase, I think we mentioned in the other episode, the phrase act of worship, like, you're not going to find that specific terminology in the New Testament. That's just has become our customary way of discussing what we're doing. But yeah, it's about our heart pouring out love to God. And I love that comparison. There's this chapter that says, prove your love for the Lord, as opposed to the love of money, which is the root of all kinds of evil. And so it's a demonstration of where your heart is and who you love.
Let's speak to the context of these passages. You know, the person who asked the question asked, you know, it was 1 Corinthians 16:2, a special contribution or something they did every Sunday. You know, we know whatever the case, I mean, there definitely were some specific circumstances that were going on there, right? We'll speak to that in a minute. At the same time, it's interesting that this was a directive that Paul had given to the churches of Galatia, which, remember, Galatia is not one place, it's a region. And so there was this broad call for virtually all the churches to be involved in this first day of the week, putting something aside for the purpose of, you know, having money in the church treasury, essentially, you know, generally speaking, to do the work of the church. Specific circumstances, right? What do we want to build onto that?
I would just say, yeah, for sure, there's specific circumstances, because Paul tells us, right? He says, I gave orders to the church of Galatia on every first day of the week, set something aside so there be no gatherings when I come. So Paul's coming through to get this collection. Paul's not coming through to pick up hours. So that is unique. However, there are other things that the New Testament says that Christians must do, and those things involve contribution. You think about orphans, widows, support for preachers, 1 Corinthians 9, Galatians 6 and verse 6. And so I think what we do is, like, we do take from this pattern in 1 Corinthians 16:2. They were already assembled. Paul has all of that when you come together language in 1 Corinthians 11. Paul says, since y'all are here, make sure that you contribute and that you give. And Paul was taking that collection for a special purpose. I don't think our collection has to be for that same purpose, but this was a special scenario following this same pattern. We have other needs. And so we say, hey, we're going to give on the first day of the week to take care of those things as well.
I've often told people, like, okay, if I'm someone who is trying my best to follow the New Testament, and I'm looking for, okay, hey, how did they handle financially, the financial obligations? Like, what did they do? How did they support this? I'm going to look to 1 Corinthians 16 as a pattern of sorts. I mean, some people don't like that term. As an example, I mean, okay, that's how they did it. Hey, I mean,
Yep.
I think that's the way I'm sort of going to look at that as well.
Yeah, I mean, even the language of Epaphroditus in Philippians 2 lends itself to some sort of collection. Like, how did he gather up all of the funds, right? Like,
Right,
I received from Epaphroditus, and then Paul speaks collectively, what you all collectively have given. So the ideas and the concepts are clearly there. Like you said, there is a pattern concerning what took place.
Yeah. Yeah. The need might change to some extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be, Paul wasn't taking money from the Corinthians, but he will tell them in chapter 9, like, you should pay the one who is providing you with spiritual nourishment and spiritual teaching, the same things in Galatians 6. So there's a need that's going to exist among these churches for at least meeting that. So how is that going to be done? I think 1 Corinthians 16 kind of lays that out, that on the first day of the week, that's when the collection is made. And this specific one seems to be designated for the saints at Jerusalem. But then beyond that, there's going to be needs, and it's going to continue to follow this same pattern where here's where the money is collected, where it is, so that when the need arises, that congregation has the funds that they can dip into to supply those needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also add one more thing, Robert. You think about, like, in Acts, they're giving and stuff, but even when Ananias and Sapphira give, they lay it at the apostles' feet. Like, this symbolizes some kind of, there was some repository. Somebody kept track of the funds. Somebody had the money, the proceeds from the land that was sold and the various things. But I don't think we lose anything by being honest about 1 Corinthians 16 and the immediate context of what's being discussed. But I also don't think we should run to the extreme of saying, well, if Paul's not coming to pick up your collection, out goes that whole pattern of 1 Corinthians 16. Right. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. Okay. So then the question was, well, does that mean that corporate contribution is the only time we can ever give?
Whoever said that, if they want to send me something anytime, it's fine.
Does MAIL, the Light Network, take electronic funds?
Yeah, right. No, but thelightnetwork.tv/store does. I'm just saying. Yeah. So obviously, no one can contend from Scripture that the only time any good that can be done that involves finances has to go through the church treasury. So if we're populating, if we're accruing funds into the church treasury, even that isn't a blanket statement that I'm about to make. But the primary means by which funds are made available to the church for the purpose of the work of God is the first day of the week contribution. But as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good to all men, especially those of the household of faith. So, if special needs arise, I'm thinking about, there are things all the time that take place. We had some tornadoes in Tennessee last week as we're recording this, and there are some people who have some immediate needs. Now, there may be some funds available within church treasuries that could work to provide immediate assistance or relief, but it could be that some special circumstances also need to arise. We've got some families here who are dealing with some medical difficulties, and it's causing them some great expense. And there's a group of Christians who have just gotten together. It's not a thing the elders have decided necessarily. They've just gotten together and said, hey, we're going to pool some money together and put it in an envelope and go and hand it to this family. Is that a violation of 1 Corinthians 16? I couldn't say that it would be. So I guess that's where I am with that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's like, is it ever wrong to do good in the life of other people?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could walk through the life of Jesus and obviously see that, no, it's never wrong. It's similar to, in my mind, the arguments in Jesus' day about the Sabbath. And they're like, wait a minute, the Sabbath regulation, we can't.
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, that's not its purpose. It's not trying to restrict you from doing good and helping people.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure Acts 4 and 5 was a special contribution, and I don't think it was a Sunday when they were dropping the money off. The people were, the saints in Jerusalem needed help. Like, you just, and furthermore, if you think about it, especially with our modern electronic banking and things along those lines, I give my check on Sunday. It's not going to hit the bank until sometime Monday.
Yeah, that's right.
So technically, it's not even. I mean, what is the ultimate difference here? It's not.
Yep.
And I'm with Chance. I've been studying Luke some, and Jesus made an argument on one occasion that I'd never really noticed when they said, "How can you do this on the Sabbath?" And basically, Jesus' response is, "What better day to do it?"
Yeah.
Where you're talking about people receiving rest, like any notion we get that we cannot do good, or good must only be restricted to a certain day of the week or a time or a moment, is something we should immediately run from.
Yeah. And furthermore, I mean, most of our bills don't come due on Sundays. Things like, it's like, "Oh, I'm sorry you had this emergency on a Monday. We'll get back to you after we've gotten together next Sunday." And hey, sometimes I guess there may be a need that is similar to that. If there's like a great mission need or something, multi-$1,000 something, but it's like, otherwise that's why these funds are here. That's why, hey, listen, we're here at the end of the year. A lot of leaders within churches are making budgets for the next year and all of that. I mean, we're just trying, and most churches I know set aside a certain amount of money under a line item called benevolence. And that is basically, these are funds we're going to have on hand to do good for people when needs arise for them. I mean, that's what that is. Would it be fair to say, go ahead, Harm.
I was just going to say, Acts 6 even calls it the daily distribution of the bread. So
there you go. Yeah.
Daily. I mean, they did it every day.
Would it be fair to say this? Like, if I'm just trying to offer like practical biblical advice, the collection, the weekly corporate collection should take priority in terms of my budget, right? I mean, Paul says you think about this stuff before you show up. I mean, you've budgeted that, for lack of a better way of putting it, and you're trying to do it in a way that is generous and cheerful and all of that, which has equal parts to do with the amount that you're giving based on what you feel you can do, but also with the disposition with which you come to bring that gift. So, in my mind, and in light of 1 Corinthians 16 and 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, I guess I would recommend prioritizing the corporate collection while acknowledging the fact that it's never wrong to do good for another person. And if another need arises and you can sacrifice more than what you regularly budget, which in itself is a sacrifice, then do that and do good to all men. I mean, is that sound advice? You want to tag anything to that or rebut it?
Yeah, I don't think anybody in Corinth could have said when a needy Corinthian walked by, "Well, I gave to the Judean collection last week. Sorry."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't,
right.
Like, that's the whole Corbin argument of Mark 7. Like, well, I've got special things to do with this money. But as you mentioned, when the local congregation is depending on us and they budget it based on what they believe church members are going to do, you got this pattern of purposeful giving, laying by in store. I think you're right. The first day of the week contribution takes priority. And then as we have other opportunities, we should capitalize on those.
All right. So 5 minutes or so on how would you characterize biblical generosity then? In as much, and I get why the person asked this question, right? That's sort of the underpinnings of everything we've just described. What characteristics are involved in the biblical notion of being someone who's generous? We've talked about sacrifice, right? I guess generosity would imply some level of sacrifice. An awareness of God's generosity, right? God's inexpressible gift, 2 Corinthians 9:15. I guess generosity would include some idea of stewardship. The things that I have are not my own. They've been given to me, entrusted to me for a purpose, for the master's purpose. Let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor with his hands so that he may have to give to the one who needs, Ephesians 4:28. The rich are to do good, laying up for themselves, treasures in heaven, 1 Timothy 6:18.
Robert's a
what
concordance. Y'all see this? Y'all see what's
just
happening?
let it go.
I'm trying to prime y'all's pump here.
I love
I'm
it.
just priming
I love
y'all's
it.
pump.
I'm having a blast.
What
But
else? That's all I got.
would summarize simply by saying this: forget percentages and that sort of thing. You got the passages. Be a person whose life is characterized by your hands extended out more than they are taken in.
There you go.
If you do that, you're going to be a generous person. The most generous people in the Bible often didn't know it. They didn't watch themselves in the mirror during their work. They were just hands out in life more than in. And if we live that way, the cumulative nature of our lives will be that we were characterized by generosity. And Paul says in 1 Timothy 6, be ready to distribute, be prepared to do this sort of thing. And may our lives be marked. People are going to give to us. We've got to take care of our families. But more than being inward, more than always holding our chips in conservatively under whatever reasons there may be, just be a person who gives more of time and resources and help. And God's doing the calculations. God's going to add all that up. God knows what we have, what we didn't have, what we could do, surplus over the top versus God doesn't get into all that. Just keep giving, keep having your hands extended, and God will be pleased with that, I believe.
Good. All right. Question number 3. Boy, these are good questions. Here's the next one. Dear Sirs, that's the nicest thing anybody ever said about us. Thanks so much for the work you do and the time you give to the 4 Preachers in a Podcast. My husband and I listen to it. All right, this is a lady who's writing this.
All right,
just
we're
want you to
picking
know.
up the hermeneutical skills.
And she says that the podcast spawns great conversation. That's good. Mission accomplished. I'd love to hear some thoughts from you guys on how you manage media exposure for children in your home. We're first-time parents. We generally don't do TV during the weekday, but in the evenings and on weekends, we put animated films on to enjoy with our 15-month-old. I question this a lot. I wonder what general or loose guidelines you might consider before bringing media into your homes. Thanks for your consideration. Brad wants to take the lead on this one, I know, but all right.
In order to keep that male from becoming angry, I'm out.
All right, here's why we're snickering. First of all, hey, listen, it's a great conscientious question.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I like where your head's at as a parent. And as a parent, I think about stuff like this too. At the same time, we're not going to give you hard and fast rules because this is an area of liberty. And, you know, you're going to have to sort of figure some of these things out. We could cite Christians who would tell you to remove the TV from your home. And we could cite Christians, I suppose, who would basically say, you know, hey, let it all in, whatever. So, you know, you're going to have to come up with some stuff on your own on that, admitting the fact that that is not a satisfactory answer to the question that you have entrusted into our care. So what do we want to tell this mom and dad who are conscientious about their 15-month-old, but perhaps their 15-month-old future as well?
Yeah. I'm with you, Robert. I think it's most definitely entertainment, and the decisions there fall under the umbrella of authority for that home, right? And for our home. And so it doesn't have to look like what everybody else is doing. It doesn't have to look like whatever it looked like in our home growing up and whatever parameters our parents had for entertainment.
Or lack thereof. Anyway.
Or lack thereof, right? You know, our children are like, Dad, you didn't have color TV. I most certainly did.
Wow.
Well, my daughter thinks that because I was born in the 1900s, that means I was alive for the entire century. So, anyway. Sorry.
I mean, we had Nintendo. You had to blow on that cartridge to get it to work.
That's
You
correct.
did have to
That's
blow on
correct.
that card.
Yes.
So
All the way up and down it, too.
correct. Multiple times. You got that thing to work.
Didn't have compressed air or anything. I mean,
No.
They weren't compressing air back then. What do you do?
I guess, I'll just say offer moderation. I mean, moderation is going to be key from the beginning moving forward. You know, but even then it's going to fall under what you perceive to be moderation for your family. So less than helpful, but
I thought of a few things, and I'm like, you know, hey, take this with a grain of salt. Don't don't this, and a lot of this is obvious, but I'm going to say it out loud because I think it helps us to build some walls if we're looking for walls. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, number one, don't watch or listen or consume anything that obviously compromises, your faith, right? Is there something about this, which I have trouble coming up with a specific example on this, but is there something that I'm watching or consuming? I guess it would be like pornography or something that would specifically be sin. And then number two.
So let's get this clear. You're saying pornography is sin.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Number two.
And do not include that in media. Okay.
No,
Perfect.
don't show that to your 15-month-old. Okay. Number two. Does this violate my conscience? So, is there something, and this is where the liberty thing comes in. Like, does watching this make me feel weird? Do I feel guilty? Would I feel embarrassed if somebody knew that I was watching this? I mean, those may or may not be signs that you're going against your conscience. And so, just think about that a little bit. Is there something that I'm watching that's tempting me to sin? I guess the classic example is like, they try and make beer commercials where, it looks really enticing. Okay, so like, am I being tempted to go out and get drunk because I watched that beer commercial? Okay, that's kind of a silly example, but I mean, I think that serves the point. And then, am I just watching too much, or am I spending too much time on social media or whatever? Bearing in mind that it's not wrong to be on Facebook. It's not wrong to listen to a podcast. Thanks for listening. It's not wrong to watch TV. I mean, hey, you need to rest. And so that's okay. But there comes a point when you cross a line at which you have done too much of that, maybe to the neglect of things that you should be doing. And so, every person has to evaluate, am I doing this too much? And for me, these four things just kind of help provide some guiding principles on what I'm consuming and the frequency with which I'm doing that.
Can I add one more? You had four. Can I add a fifth, Robert?
No,
because I agree
go
with
ahead.
everything you said. Well, I'll see you in court. But anyway, yeah. So I would add a fifth thing that sometimes we don't focus on when it comes to entertainment, and that is this: beware of making decisions based on fear. And here's what I mean. Colossians 2 says, beware of trying to find your righteousness in the do not taste, do not handle, do not touch realm of things.
Good.
If you think that's going to automatically help you to be more godly, you are mistaken.
That's good.
That might be the fruit of the problem. That's not the root of the problem. And sometimes we get our spiritual identity in what we abstain from. And Paul says abstinence in and of itself is not going to be the key to godliness. He bleeds into chapter 3 and he says, seeking things which are above is what's going to help you be godly. Now, as you mentioned, pornography and other things, there are some inherently sinful things we need to abstain from, but even just abstaining from porn and all of those things isn't going to give you a healthy sexual view or you name it. And so I would just say as Christians, we don't need to make decisions from a posture of fear. Paul says God didn't give us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and sound mind. So if I'm saying I don't want to watch TV, the boogeyman's in there, bad things are going to come out and get me, that's not going to help me with spiritual prowess and depth and maturity. Now, if we're making sound decisions, like you said, this is ungodly, this is a waste of time, I'm overindulging or whatever, those are offense. I'm making decisions for the betterment, but just beware of retreat and fear and getting our identity and merely what we abstain from. Because Colossians 2, Paul says, don't let anybody come and tell you that that's inherently the key to godliness. And I'm godly because we don't have a TV, never seen a rated R movie, and all of those things, because that's not the key to the kingdom of God. It's just not. And people sometimes, at least I've run into people who think that they're automatically godly. And here's a list of zeros of all the things they don't do. Right. And like, that's easy math to me. That's just zero. You got nothing. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. And back
in
to
and
Chance's,
of itself. So.
Yeah. Great point. And back to Chance's point too, then you may have to, in your home, set certain parameters that are going to basically be the rules for your home. Are the kids going to have a TV in their room? Are they going to have a computer in their room? At what age are they going to get a phone? Are they going to play video games? If they do, what rating are they allowed to do? Or are there certain, hey, maybe there's nothing wrong with certain video games, but you're noticing some tendencies in your child. There are some kid shows we don't watch, and it's not because the kid show is inherently evil. They're not pushing an agenda. I just don't like the way my children act when they watch the children on that show acting that way. They get whiny. They start complaining. So we just said, we're not watching that show. You know, it annoyed me anyway to begin with. And now you're annoying me because of the way you're acting. Okay. So that's just what we do. And, you know, you have to come up with that and figure that out. That, you know, that's just the way that is. Okay. Brad, do you want to move on to question 4?
Sure.
I thought you did. Gentlemen, again, one of the nicest things.
That is so kind. Very kind.
First of all, this podcast is excellent. Thank you. What are your thoughts on using liturgical writings in prayer? For example, I frequently pray the Litany of Humility, which was written by a Catholic priest, and also the ancient Hebrew nightly Shema. It has not become rote because they better express my thoughts. Could this be similar to praying the Psalms? Again, I'm so enjoying your discussions. Thank you for this. This sort of piggybacks off of an episode we did this season called The Hard Work of Christian Prayer. I'm pretty sure we talked about praying the Psalms, and then I know in our private religion discussion not that long ago, was that last episode? I forget.
That was last episode.
We talked about, you know, many words in prayer and all of that, vain repetitions. Yeah. What do you guys think about this?
I obviously think it's okay, and I think everybody does it. Like that or not, believe that or not.
Mm-hmm. Everybody adopts somebody else's prayer words.
God guard and direct us. That's all I need to say.
Amen.
And okay, it's not written in a book somewhere. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Okay, so, you know, if we want to poke our chest out and say, well, we don't use a liturgy, you can't point to a book. No, but I can point you to 1,000 services that show you the same thing. I mean, it's the same thing.
Ready recollection.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
I mean,
it's an oral tradition instead of a written one.
If someone could go back and copyright God, Guard, and Direct, first of all, who would that person be, and how much royalty money would they be owed?
A ton.
Yeah, they'd be rich.
Just give it to them on Sunday. But anyway,
I do.
And I think I would just say this. I would recommend Philip Yancey's book, Prayer, Does It Make Any Difference? He has an excellent chapter where he discusses, look, I believe that when I am in a rut in prayer, I feel like I'm just saying the same things, or it's just not connecting. It's not working. Maybe my brain is tired. Maybe my soul is tired. I don't know what it is, but to take the prayers that other people have prayed and to pray them, I mean, you're still praying. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something to that. It can revive your soul. Now, it's like anything. Would I take that and say, okay, every church of Christ across America must pray these set prayers? Now, that's obviously a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it's kind of like everything. You have to bring balance. You have to bring common sense to it. And I believe there's tremendous benefit of praying the prayers of other people. And that's not an empty or a vain repetition, because I'm praying them. Those words are becoming my own as I pray them and as they apply to my situation, because I don't even know the full situation of the person who offered the prayer, wrote the prayer to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think it's great.
I would say this, like, we employ the words of others to express the thoughts of our hearts in song. Like, I don't guess I have ever written an original song that I offered to the Lord in worship. I've always, in singing, employed the words of another to express the thoughts of my heart in worship.
You're making a little too much sense for me right now.
I see this. This seems to be the exact same thing. Suddenly, I've found someone else's words that they have written that really express thoughts and emotions of my heart that I want to express to God. And so I think I don't see anything wrong with using their words.
I would say
express the heart.
Even if their original intent in what they wrote in the song is different than my intent. The words themselves are still, like, for an example, the song Faith of Our Fathers. If you do some historical research into what was going on there, you're dealing more with a persecution in Catholic Protestant traditions. But those words can just as easily be applied in my mind when I think the faith of my fathers. I don't think about people directly there. I think about my spiritual forefathers, the ones who I read about in the New Testament and who have been doing this all throughout. And so it's, you're taking even if their intent was different, what my intentions are with it, the words themselves are fruitful. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind.
And I would just add to that, like, I agree with all of that. I think it's fine to do it, and I think it's healthy to do it. I would say be sure to learn from these prayers and don't let your reliance on them be for lack of eloquence. Meaning it's okay to do it, but don't feel so intimidated that if you can't say it like Spurgeon or Lewis or whoever, that you never make it your own. The more you read the Psalms, you develop a lexicon of your own and learn how to pray to God because you've done some of this. And so I think it's healthy to do, no problem with it. I think Chance's song analogy is spot on, but I also think it's helpful on occasion. There are some unique things that you're dealing with that you will deal with that you just need to package yourself, realize you're talking to God. God's your father, but also your friend, and you can go to him in your own fumbly, stumbly way. The Holy Spirit helps. He can take some of that and God can hear you through. So your reliance on other material or cooperation with other material, never let it be for lack of eloquence or because you just feel like, man, I've been reading these and the Psalms and other things, and I just can't say it any better than anybody else. And so if that's your only motivation, which I'm not saying is the case, remember, God does want to hear from you. He's hearing from you when you do that, but you have some things to say too, and it might not be as polished and as impressive as others, but that's okay. I think a lot of people are intimidated. I've been out to eat with people and they won't pray over the food because it's like, you're the preacher, you're the professional God talker. And it's like, whoa, man, what do you do other times? Like, I mean, you don't phone me in to pray over your Wendy's 5 for $5. So, I mean, you've got to be able to do that yourself, right? Like you got to be able to.
But to be fair, the reason why they don't call you to pray over their 5 for $5 is you demand a 5 for $5 as payment.
Exactly.
That's right. Junior bacon, no mayo, of course.
There's a reason we're going 5 for $5, Kyron. We can't afford to pay for everybody's food. Okay.
I got you.
No mayo, of course.
Of course. I'm with you. No mayo.
I think this is a lot of the value in the spiritual discipline, I would say, of praying with other people as well. I mean, I've often benefited from thoughtful people who pray for things, and I'm like, I never would have thought to pray for that. Or I wouldn't have prayed for that in those words. And I don't know, it's helped me a lot in that way. Hey, Hiram, just for someone who's not familiar with that term, the Shema, tell somebody what that is if they're not familiar with it. Dr. Kemp, Hebrew scholar.
It's from Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5. And in Hebrew, the word Shema means hear. And it's the first word in Hebrew for Deuteronomy 6, 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. But that word Shema, it means to listen, sometimes carries the idea of obey and all of that. So when we talk about the Shema of Israel, we're talking about Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5, the greatest command. And it said that Israelites chanted this and repeated this on a regular basis. The Old Testament doesn't say it, but a lot of people have thought that was the case. And so, that's where that comes from. The Shema of Israel. That's the first word, Shema Yisrael, and then the prayer starts. So
good. All right. Boy, this has been fun. The feedback episode, I've enjoyed this a whole lot. We want you to continue to send us your thoughts, questions, comments. You can call us gentlemen or sirs, whatever you want. I will do my best to rightly identify your gender when I read your question. mail at thelightnetwork.tv.
I tell you what, we need to create 2 accounts, MALE and female.
Yes. It's like in the old days when there was an entrance for the men and the women. The men go through this door, the women go through this door.
Look, I'm not going that far. I mean, you're just dancing all around on kind of issues now. Yeah, I'm out on that. I'm out.
Season finale, maybe series finale. Who knows? We said that last season. MAIL at thelightnetwork.tv. It's a one size fits all. You send us your thoughts. We appreciate it. Your encouragement means a lot. Constructive criticism, whatever you want to do, just shoot it our way. We'd love to hear from you. We are in the process of planning season 3. We've got some things down already, and we'll be back first of the year with one caveat, and that brings us with a heavy heart on my side to have to throw it to Hiram to give this announcement. I'm going to make you say it. I'm not saying
Say it isn't
I
so.
thought you had this already written up, man.
Say it isn't so.
I have nothing written up, man.
So I've been kicked off the Light Network. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
no,
I'm
no.
kicking Hiram off right now because there is no way that we're going to let him come over here and say stuff like that.
Because we are all in disagreement.
That's right. We've tried to outvote you, and I don't know. This isn't working.
No, but all jokes aside, I've decided to step away from podcasting just because got a lot on my schedule trying to finish my PhD. I've got 2 more seminars to take before my dissertation, family responsibilities and other things, and just to spread a little bit too thin and just need to pull back. Love these guys, going to continue to talk to them and be involved with them, but just the weekly commitment of the podcast is one of those things. I'm looking at where can I cut time back and all of that. And so that's just one of the things that I feel like I need to do right now is just step away. So
Sure.
As he said, right now. So
Right.
we'll leave it for right now and leave the door open.
I mean, I'm kind of hurt. I feel like we provide a great deal of research for your PhD. Like, I don't understand.
Hiram will be missed for the 5x5 and the no mayo and the green beans and the mama camp and the holding up the Hebrew Bibles like it's no big deal.
Exactly.
And all of those things. But anyway, Hiram, we appreciate you. Thanks for the 2 seasons. And hey, we want everybody to know we're going to keep calling this 4 preachers and a podcast, even though the majority of our episodes will only be 3 preachers. But that's because Hiram is always here in spirit and perhaps in voice. And we also want to leave the door open so that Hiram can step right back in at any moment. You know, he can pull down the old mic, dust it off a little. You know, he's ready to go. Just saying. All right. And, I mean, we chose the music because it's Hiram's theme music.
It is.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
I'm pretty sure I hear, even before this goes public, I hear people, there's great wailing and gnashing of teeth.
I know.
There's
I
weeping
hear it.
and lamentation.
Mm-hmm.
And lamentation.
Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted.
they shouldn't be watching TV.
Don't call me Robert anymore. Call me Mara. All I gotta say.
Oh.
Thanks for being with us on this episode of 4 Preachers in a Podcast. We look forward to seeing you next season. Until then, Mara out. Stay cool.
Stay cool.
Call me Mara. That one caught me way off guard.